For today's show, it's F1 Through the Lens on Behind the Shot. Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. I'm Steve Brazill. As always, this is the show where we try and get inside the mind of a great photographer by taking a closer look behind one of their shots, from conception to completion, all those stories and challenges that happen in between. If you want to see the show notes for today's show or any links that we talk about, you can head to the website, behindtheshot.tv. You just find this episode. You'll find a little blurb that I wrote about my guest today, or again, with any show. You'll find all the links that we talk about and a small gallery of their work as well. If you're watching on YouTube, down below the like and subscribe buttons, and on your way down, please hit those and click the bell and choose all. But down in the description area, you'll find all the links that we talk about. I can't put the entire blog post down there, but most of the stuff is down there. And one other thing is, if you are watching on YouTube, I find a lot of YouTube viewers just want to get to the photo dissection. That's cool. I've got chapter markers down there, right? If you don't want to listen to the interview portion, jump on down, jump around wherever you need, chapter markers down below. But I always start my show with a small kind of introduction and getting to know the guest. And the reason for that is I want you to understand why you should listen to the guest that we're talking about. And before I bring the guest on, I got to say thank you to somebody, because I would not have found today's guest and their work, which I am a huge fan of now, without Dave Kallman. Dave Kallman suggested, and Dave, if I'm mispronouncing your name, I apologize, but Dave suggested this guest to me, I think on Twitter, and then I asked him to email it to me, and he did. And what's interesting is Dave is a motorsports reporter and photographer for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Great photographer in his own right. And to suggest today's guest, really appreciate it. So I'd like to welcome to the show North Carolina-based motorsport and automotive photographer Jamey Price. Jamey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing really good. I'm so glad Dave recommended you to me, because I was not familiar with your work, sadly enough. And I got to say, I told you this kind of in the green room, I've had a lot of great photographers on this show. Your work is some of my favorite work I have ever seen.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I love my job, and the only thing that I can hope is that it comes across in the images that I take and the work that I do and the access that I have, because it's not all about access, but like any great musician would tell you, or musician photography, it's kind of about the access. So
yeah, I have people who say, I love having access, but I like being in the photo pit. Okay, I love being in the photo pit too, but given access, trust me, I'm gonna definitely use it. It's interesting because getting to know you and researching you and looking through your work, when I bring you up, it kind of immediately implies to people motorsports photography, but I don't want to start there. I want to start before that, because this one blew my mind. You know where I'm going, I have the feeling. You were a thoroughbred steeplechase racehorse jockey and exercise rider in the U.S., England, and Ireland. You had 11 wins. How the hell does one go from that to motorsports photography?
Well, there's a lot more similarities between horse racing and car racing than you would assume. But I grew up around horses. Both of my parents are from Baltimore, Maryland, which is just steeped in horse tradition. And I just got thrown in the deep end from a really young age, and I fell in love with it. Long before I discovered photography, long before I discovered that I was okay with a camera, I was on horses. And when I was in high school, I was a swimmer, and I was a cross country runner and a track runner. So I was pretty slight of build. Like you're not football players, but I just had this passion for horses. And my dad especially had a really intense passion for race horses and the horse racing community. And I kind of picked it up somewhat slowly, but very quickly got addicted to it. And just the adrenaline rush. Winston Churchill once famously said, "The outside of a horse is good for the inside of a man." And it's true. It's just they're such amazing animals. They're very intelligent. And it was one of the most formative parts of my life, but it's also been a very formative part of my photography career, because when I picked up my photography and got my first camera, one of the things that I was doing was I was going to events that I was competing in. So races that I was competing in, I would just bring my camera and I had the access. No security guard in their right mind is going to turn down a jockey wearing boots and a flak vest and basically have my helmet like under my arm. They're not going to turn you away from like going in the stable area because I'm a jockey. Like, I'm meant to be in the stable area. So I kind of used the access that I had as a jockey to build a portfolio, create images, tell stories. And I took my camera to England and Ireland when I lived in England and Ireland. And I loved the entire experience. And it was very formative for not just my personal growth, but definitely my photography growth.
It's interesting because you said you were a swimmer. So I have to ask, because in high school, I did water polo and swimming. I was a horrible swimmer, but I loved being a goalie in water polo. What did you swim?
Oh man, I was not great at anything, but I was okay at everything. And so my coach, so I was a collegiate swimmer as well, which was when I picked up photography. So I did 4 years of college swimming, and I swam everything from the 50. We swim in yards in the U.S. For those of you that are in the U.S., we don't swim meters. So I swam 50 yards sprint all the way up to the mile
Wow.
In competition events. Like, it wasn't just practice stuff. I was swimming
Entirely
every.
free, or did you freestyle, or
Yeah,
did you also
I
do
was
breaststroke?
terrible at everything. I was terrible at everything else. My coach tried to make me into a breaststroker at one point, and I just don't have the lower leg power to make that work. So we all quickly gave up on that dream and just kept me kind of as a. I was the meat and potatoes guy on the team. I wasn't going to beat anybody, but I was definitely going to be coming, second, third, fourth kind of thing.
I remember having to do a 200 IM once, and
Worst event in the whole
oh
world.
my God, man. First of all, I'm doing the breaststroke thinking there's no water shooting out of my chin like the good guys. And then I'm doing butterfly thinking this is the worst butterfly anybody around this pool has ever seen. You have been published pretty much everywhere I could think of. New York Times, ESPN, Sports Illustrated, Car and Driver, Cycle World, Road and Track, Auto Week, etc. F1 Racing, Motor Trend, and your photographs have been used by literally the top brands, racing teams, whatever. But I want to be clear: you photograph more than just autosports. You've done NFL, you've done U.S. Women's National Soccer, Kentucky Derby. That kind of fits right up your alley. You have done a lot of motorsports: NHRA, Pikes Peak, Indy, NASCAR, Le Mans, etc. My understanding is it's over 35 something around their Formula One races. But this one stuck out to me. You were named Motorsports Photographer of the Year in 2019 by the National Motorsports Press Association. Now, there are some amazing people in your genre of photography. Doing what you do, what's it like to get that kind of recognition?
Um, I've never been a huge I've never felt like I needed the awards to say like I've made it, I've accomplished something. Um, Photo competitions I find really, really challenging to pick which images you want, because images that I love, it just might not have the power and punch that somebody else is looking for. It might not stick out. It could be my favorite picture in the whole world that I've ever taken, and you put it in a competition, they're like, it's okay. And you're like, what? This is my favorite picture ever. You don't know the story behind what it took to create it or whatever, all those things. Um, but when I was given that award, it definitely meant something, to be named, the Motorsport Photographer of the Year. This year, I haven't even received it, but I won Picture of the Year for the National Motorsports Press Association. So it's definitely a huge honor to have those awards to my name, to be able to say I've done it. And yeah, it's just something to have in my office one day or hand down to the kids. Maybe they can put it in the attic and forget about it, that it ever existed, but it means something to me for sure.
It's funny. on the competition type thing. I've done image competitions. Inevitably what ends up happening is the judges rip me up, and then my friends look at me and go, I told you that was the wrong image. Every single freaking time.
I I had my wife and like four of my very good friends who are all very accomplished motorsport photographers and have had awards to their names as well. They all helped me pick the images that I did for this year, and it's such a hard process. I hated it. It makes me not want to do it. And then you get to the end and you see your selection from, because it's each year. Like the National Motorsport is, it has to be taken within the calendar year of that year. So I can't just go digging back through the archives and find the pictures that make my career look good. It has to have been done this year, and I feel like 2019 actually was kind of like a high water year for me. Like I might have peaked in 2019. It's kind of all been downhill since then.
We all get there. You know, it's funny because for those of you that have never done an image competition, a friend of mine, Troy Miller, said to me once, a great image does not necessarily translate to a great image competition image. It's two completely different worlds. You can take a picture of a bride and groom that they think is the most amazing picture they've ever had, and there ain't no way in hell it's going to win an award anywhere.
No.
I want to get into some general questions before we bring up this shot we're going to talk about. And again, this shot, I think, may be one of my favorite compositions that I've literally ever seen. So I'm excited to dissect it. But first of all, you photographed a lot. What haven't you photographed that you wish you could?
I would love to shoot the Masters or any pro golf tournament. I'm very well aware, I guess, of what other photographers are doing in the industry, and especially sports photographers. And I see the pictures that they make at some of these golf tournaments, and especially the Masters, when you have azaleas and beautiful grass and just the atmosphere of it, and it's such a special event. And I'm not even a golf guy. Like I don't even care about golf.
No, but the leading lines of the trees and
everything just screams, take my picture. And so I would love to be able to do that once in my career. To be honest, there isn't a lot that I haven't done that I would love to do. I've kind of dabbled in everything. And it's more, for me, it's more about like, what haven't I done in the racing world? Like there's a couple of racing events that I haven't done that I would love to do, that I'm just, I know I'll do it one day, and hopefully they won't have canceled the events because they're too dangerous, or, just stop running them because of financial reasons or whatever it is. But I've always been very passionate about motorsport and auto racing, and those events that I specifically would love to cover, like the Isle of Man, the Bathurst 1000, big ones. I've done a lot, and I'm very thankful to have done a lot.
What is, thinking about some of the ones you just named, actually, but just in general, motorsport photography, what's the biggest challenge in that type of photography to you? I shouldn't even say to you. I shouldn't say to you because you've been doing it so long. It's probably going to be different than most people. From a generic point of view, what's the biggest challenge?
So I think the thing that people struggle with when they aren't used to doing motorsport photography, when they're first, show up to a racetrack and it's all uncontrollable everything. Like you have no control over the drivers, you have no control over the cars, you have no control over the weather, you have no control over where you can and can't go, even on the racetrack. Like I can choose what corner I go to, but I might not be allowed to stand in certain parts of that corner because it's too dangerous. I think the lack of control intimidates a lot of people. Like some of the best automotive photographers in the world struggle with car racing because they can't control everything about it. They can't control the light. They can't put a strobe here and, use a little fill flash there and, make this person turn a little bit more this way so that they get more of their facial profile or whatever it is. And I think that's the thing that I love about my particular genres, because that's what I excel at. Like that's where I was trained, is in the newspaper world. I was trained as a newspaper photographer. So you have no control. You can't control. You're not allowed to control your subjects. Like, I don't, unless you're doing a portrait of somebody in their home for a story on that person. And even then, it should be more like very candid, like you're a fly on the wall,
Right.
but not somebody that's there dictating the situation.
It's the photojournalism rule, and that
Totally.
is
And
you're photographing what happens in front of you, and as soon as you become part of that story in any way, even if it's can we put a candle here? As soon as you become part of the story, it's no longer photojournalism technically.
yeah, exactly. So I've always grown up learning photography in that sense where like I'm a photojournalist. I call myself a motorsport photojournalist. I don't even call myself a motorsport photographer.
Oh,
I'm documenting a race or a weekend or team, whatever it is. I'm documenting them without changing the situation. There are times when I do have to set up portraits and set up things and set up like a situation, but 99% of my job is like it happens to be walking in front of me or driving past me. I have to choose where I'm going to go, and everything in the picture has to be chosen by my brain, by my composition, by the settings I'm using, whatever it is. I can't control it because I can't control it. Like, there's nothing to control.
it's funny because as you were describing that, I mean, you know what I photograph, and it felt literally like me describing music photography to somebody. I have no control. I can't look at the singer and say, dude, look over here. Or the singer
Yeah.
runs up, screams in my face, and is gone. I can't say, could you hang out for a little bit? I have no control over the lighting most of the time. I have little control over where I stand. And those are the same types of things that make me love my genre of photography. And I would have not, before this conversation, seen much relationship between the two. There's something in your work, though, I got to say. Your body of work, I always look for a common thread in my guests. I look through their portfolio and try and find a common thread. Now, sometimes the photographer knows that they have that common thread, and sometimes it's completely subconscious. Like they have no clue. And the common thread that I see in your work is motion. And I don't mean motion as in what you shoot, as in a moving car. I mean motion in how you shoot. Panning, dragging shutters. It is a motion that I actually feel when I look at your pictures. I get motion sickness. And it is entirely possible that somebody like me that suffers from motion sickness, if they're on a roller coaster, could look at some of your shots and get that sensation of motion sickness. So I'm curious how, or more to the point, even are you envisioning that motion that you get before you shoot?
In some ways, but because I mean, I've been doing this for so long, and I wish that I could have a tally of how many hours I've actually spent trackside just each year, like year to year. Because I spend so much time trackside, what you should be doing with the camera when a car is at a certain position to you. And, it's kind of the bread and butter of a motorsport photographer is you have to be able to show that the cars are moving on track. Like when people send me their pictures, on Instagram or via email or whatever, the common thread there is the people that have less experience, they just take a picture and whatever their camera told them to set the exposure to, like, specifically the shutter speed, because that's what we all just kind of lean on. It's not necessarily the aperture. They'll send me a picture and the car is parked on the racetrack. And you're like, okay, but
Right.
I know that this car is doing 190 miles an hour. Why does it look like you parked it on the racetrack? And there are times when you have to park it on the racetrack, but that time isn't this particular shot. Like you have to know when to do what you need to do. Um, and the rule that I always use is if you can see the tire manufacturer on the side of the tire, so if it's a Michelin or Pirelli or Goodyear, whatever it is, if you can see that, you have to be showing that the car is in motion with a slower shutter speed. So whatever it is, even if it's a 200th of a second or a 400th of a second, like you'll start seeing that tire rotate and some blur in the actual logo around 1/800th. And then every stop you go down, it just starts getting blurrier in the background. And that's where it becomes more challenging to actually get a sharp pan shot, because there is a point where the car is physically traveling a fairly large distance while the mirror, because I'm still on a mirrorless or a mirrored camera, not a mirrorless
Right.
camera. So while the mirror is open and it's creating the image, the car is traveling. Like, you can do the math on it, and I'm not a math guy, but you can do the math on it and figure out, like, okay, this car was doing 190 miles around, 190 miles an hour here, and this was a tenth of a second. I know how far this car traveled, and it's like 37 feet or something like that.
Right.
And it's a ridiculous amount of distance. Like, 37 feet is a long way. So there's a lot of things happening in that 37 feet. And you get used to it. Like, it just becomes second nature, where I'll go to a corner and I won't even use, a shutter speed that doesn't make sense to me. But some people, I've always really appreciated when somebody that doesn't do motorsport photography, when they come do what I do, for whatever reason, they've been given an assignment from a magazine or a driver or a team or whatever. You get people that are normally wedding photographers or music photographers or horse racing photographers, and they come do motorsports, and you get a completely different, like, eye and perspective on motion and speed and car racing, and setting up an image and those types of things. So just my brain, because it's done it so many times, I know when I go and I see a car going past me this way, I know where my shutter speed's going to kind of end up. And it's challenging to kind of get yourself out of that hole, actually, and do something different.
So, but you obviously then are aware of what I'm talking about with the motion that I see in your work. And you said the one thing when I've done image critiques before, and I tell people, why is the car parked on the track, right? I mean, there has to be, same with an airplane, by the way. If you're photographing an air show and somebody's flying an old P-51 Mustang that's a prop, and the prop is frozen, it's a glider, right? I mean,
yeah.
you've got to try.
You haven't photographed a propeller plane. You've photographed a glider.
Yes, exactly. And
jets are much better, much easier to shoot now.
they hide that flaw. Yeah, and it goes back to that photojournalism thing, right? You want to tell a story. You're not just taking a picture of an object. You're telling a story of some sort, whatever you choose that story to be. But in this particular case, motion may be a part of it. The other thing that you have in your work, there's a shot that's in my head, actually. You have this insane sense of space, right? You have one shot in your portfolio online where it's a set of stands, and in another one, actually, it's buildings, like it's a F1, in a city. But you have a one where I think it's stands and people in the background. It could be buildings, I suppose. Completely blurred. The whole frame almost is that blurred background, and then at the bottom is a tack sharp car. Your sense of relationship of space. When you're looking through the camera, how do those ideas click with you?
One of the best pieces of advice that I was given when I was working at the newspaper, actually, was from the art director, Bert Fox. And Bert's comment to me was, sometimes you just have to put your camera down and just look for a second, because we get so focused through the viewfinder that you forget to look outside of that, even if you're using a wide angle lens. And I've always felt like motorsport photography and car photography is more similar to landscape photography, in that you have a subject, but it doesn't have to be the car that's the subject. Like, it can be the whole scene. Like, it can be the city, it can be the grandstand, it can be whatever. But being able to show that space, even if you take the car out of it, if it's still an interesting picture or interesting enough, then you can drop that car into that, like, lower third, and it's even more interesting. So it's very similar to landscape photography in that way, where if you go out to the mountains and you take a pretty picture of a mountain, okay, great, it's a pretty picture of a mountain, but if you add a sunset, it's even better, or nice clouds or whatever it is. So with car racing, you kind of have to not just focus on, looking down my 500 millimeter lens where it's just, super, super tight on a car, bouncing over a curb, coming straight at me. I'll pull out my 14 to 24 millimeter super wide, fisheye lens, and you'll see something completely different. You can stand in the same corner, not move an inch, and you get 10 different pictures because you can use different shutter speeds, different lenses. It's a lot of fun to be able to find those little hidden nuggets.
That right there is a photography lesson. Stand in the same corner and take 10 different pictures, and you can get 10 different pictures. Sometimes I say to people as an exercise, if you're really stuck in a rut, go to a parking lot with one lens and make 10 good pictures. An empty parking lot. Try and make 10 pictures in a parking lot. It can be done. Not saying it's going to be easy. I want to bring up this shot before we do a couple of things. First of all, I'm coughing a lot today. I've got bronchitis, or something along those lines. So I apologize if you see me mute myself, but I'm coughing. I apologize to everybody out there. This show is available in a couple of different ways. I want to let you know you can get this show wherever you get your podcasts, your podcast app of choice, in either audio or video format, audio only or video, if your app of choice, like Apple Podcasts, supports video. If it doesn't, grab the audio version, and you can go to the blog post. It's behindtheshot.tv to see the pictures that we're talking about. But if you get the video version, you can do that as a podcast, or of course you can do it on YouTube. If you do it on YouTube, down below the like and subscribe button, I've got all the links there instead of in the blog post over at the website. Not the whole blog post, but go check that out definitely as well. Show notes for everything available in both locations, pretty much. Again, a little bit less on YouTube. So let's jump into this shot today. And again, before I bring it up, I want to kind of set this up a little bit, because according to, and I'm going off metadata that was in the image that you sent me, I'm going to butcher half of these names. Is it Marussia Formula One?
Yeah, Marussia.
Okay.
Marussia, yep.
So according to the description in the image, Marussia Formula One team practicing a pit stop with a new rookie driver, Max Chilton, at Circuit de Catalunya during a preseason February testing in 2013. And I am sorry, this right here is one of the most amazing compositions I have ever frickin' seen in photography. I've got so many questions for you. First of all, this was 2013, so this was early in your career?
Very early, yes. Like I said, I might have peaked. I might have peaked early.
No, I think you're this good easily now. And this, again, this is, to me, the perfect defining shot. For those of you on the audio feed, Jamey, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to describe this to those that are listening in audio only. I will butcher this. There is no question. So at the end, tell me what I missed and where I'm wrong. But this is a standard, 2:3 ratio landscape orientation shot. We've all seen pit stops before. We understand what happens during a pit stop. This is not the angle that we normally see. This is straight above the car from the top down. And it reinforces what I said about Jamey's work earlier with motion. So I want you to picture a 3-lane pit row, right? And a car is coming in and you are dead center over it, looking exactly straight down, okay? Between you and the action, there are 2 poles going out across these 3 lanes. They are almost exactly at the rule of thirds. And they're holding, I'm guessing they're holding, airlines for power tools so that you can get the airlines past the car so that you can do the, change the tires and stuff on the inside track side of the pit. There's a third pole that's entering at exactly 45 degrees from the lower third, right third, to the middle of the frame. And oh my God, it is perfectly positioned on one white area. The car is an orangey red type car. I'm colorblind. It's orange, I'm guessing.
It's more like not a Ferrari red, but a little bit punchier than that.
Okay. The nose of this F1 car is white. And that pole coming in at 45, it could have gone past the car. It could have been over a tire. It could have been over anything. The car position happens to be so perfect that that thing is almost dead center in the white area. Again, 3 lanes. Those 3 lanes are almost exactly at the lower and top thirds. They're designated by white dashed lines, like a parking spot is. The top third is asphalt. The bottom 2/3 are concrete. Okay. There are pit crew and tools and jacks and everything in the top third where the concrete is, and where the asphalt is. And that asphalt area is lit up by the sun. Below that, the bottom 2 lanes are in shade. So again, even the hard line of the sun is almost at that rule of third. I mean, as much as you could expect, right? At the bottom third, again, lots of people in the bottom lane, pit crew working. And at the far right of the center lane, and by the way, there's jacks and everything and power tools everywhere, right? But in front of the car, where the car is pulling into, there's a guy with a jack with a yellow line where he's supposed to position it. And here's the thing. All the crew wearing orange shirts, black pants, black and orange helmets. It's obvious. They're tack sharp, most of them. Couple of them, there's a little bit of motion. Most of them, it's though they're frozen in time. And the reason that matters is in the middle lane, entering from frame left, pure motion blur is this F1 car. Okay. And here's where it gets amazing. It's exactly at the left edge of the frame. It comes to about middle frame, just past that 45-degree bar that's sticking in. And right in front of it is an arrow pointing to the right, helping to reinforce that blur and that motion. And it's heading towards the guy with the jack on the right. In this picture, you feel like there is no way that car is not going to hit him and that it's going to stop. And in the top lane, the guy in the far right, he has an orange sign that says brake. There is so much happening in here, from the motion left to right to the arrow to the top and bottom crew and crew on the right-hand side. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it more than anybody else ever has.
My God, man, this thing is really, honestly, not saying this because you're here. This shot is brilliant.
Thank you.
EXIF data shows some things that have me so confused. This is a Nikon D3S with a 28 to 70 2.8 at 28 millimeters. Okay, that all makes sense. 28 says to me this is probably farther away than I think it is. Manual mode, auto white balance, interesting, spot metering. The shutter is 1/15 of a second, apertures at f/22, and ISO at 100 with an exposure bias of -2/3 stop. So I want to get into that EXIF data a little bit, but first of all, explain to me the setup of this shot, the overhead rig. What did you do?
So at this track, there is basically where the pit garages are on the very bottom, which is where the team would basically operate the car out of. So you're in this big building, and during preseason testing, and they don't even host testing here in this location anymore, which is a real shame. But during testing, we could go up on the roof, and basically during a race weekend, this would be where all the rich people are drinking champagne and having caviar and watching the race go past you, because you're basically, if you tilted the camera up, you would just see the grandstand. You'd see the main front start finish area. You'd see the pit lane, and so you're probably 3 stories, maybe a little bit more above the car. But right at the very bottom of the frame, which I don't think I cropped it out. I think I actually just physically held my camera out far enough. But there's a net where you would basically have it would stop a champagne glass falling on the pit crew. Like if some lady turned around and knocked it with her purse, it wouldn't send the champagne glass spinning off into the stratosphere and then end up in some pit crew box. So I'm basically standing there holding the camera as far out in front of me as I possibly can. So it's kind of like one of those shots that you can't do necessarily during a race weekend. I mean, it's not that it can't be done, but it's much more challenging because you're fighting with VIPs that have paid, an exorbitant amount of money to be there, and you kind of feel bad like getting in the way. So yeah, it's just kind of being spatially aware. It's one of those, like I was talking about earlier, you don't have control. Like I can't tell these guys, oh, I missed it. Can you guys do it again? Sorry, my bad. They're just doing maybe 3 or 4 different pit stop practices during the course of an hour. The driver will go out and do 10 laps, and then they'll do another stop and then do another 10 or 15 laps, and they'll change something. But this particular crew is basically doing a practice on a full race pit stop. A full race pit stop, they would be in fire suits. They're not in fire suits, but you can't really tell here. They're just wearing their t-shirts and normal stuff that they'd wear in the garage. But yeah, it basically gives you the impression of what a pit stop is like for Formula One. It's a ballet. It's coordination between a whole bunch of different people. I think there's maybe 20 people in this picture. I think a pit crew is allowed to have 18 during an actual Formula One like race pit stop. So you'd probably lose 2 of these guys kind of, or girls, somewhere along the way if it was an actual race pit stop.
Wow. So, okay. There's so much going through my head. First of all, this was handheld.
Yeah.
Totally blows my mind. Not what I pictured. I thought you were going to tell me, oh, well, before this happened, there's some rigging up above. And because of my credentials, I was able to actually rig something up, and that this was some remote camera that you mounted on a truss in some way.
No, it's handheld.
Wow. Okay. All right. So that brings in a whole bunch of other things then. First of all, 1/15 of a second, handheld, leaning over the edge from 3 stories up, and you got the perfect blur. I mean, really, honestly, you could not have gotten a better blur on this car. That angled pole coming in at 45 degrees from the right lower third to mid frame, being positioned, you could have leaned in wrong. Wrong's the wrong word, but to where that wasn't dead center. So the end of that angled pole is dead center, even with the arrow, which means it's going to be even with the center of the car. So many things could have gone wrong on capturing the energy and motion of this. So at a 15th of a second, the fact that this crew is not moving is surprising to me. They stand that still.
Yeah, they're very still. They can't. So with Formula One, and it's one of the things that I love about motorsport is because every single racing series does pit stops differently, and no series does it better than another one. Like they're just different. Formula One is different to NASCAR. You can't compare a NASCAR pit stop to a Formula One pit stop. So in Formula One, you have the crew, and each tire on the 4 tires on the car, each tire has a different set of guys to deal with a different part of the actual changing of the tire. So as the car's coming in, they can't move. Like if they even move an inch, basically if I did this as a video, you can see the guy that's kind of right below the arrow.
Right.
He has a wheel gun that's aimed basically at the car. What they'll do is they'll follow the car in as the basically the car comes at them. They'll follow it like panning, essentially. He's going to basically pan the wheel gun or the wheel itself as the car comes at him, but he's not to that point yet. He might be just fractionally before that. So they'll all just stand completely, totally motionless, and the car will come to them, and then they'll all go into action. So there's been some great images that are very different to this, and people have done similar images to what this one is as well. But there'll be different images where in the middle of a pit stop, it's just all motion, where the car is stationary and the people around it are jumping here and there and everywhere. And it's just kind of, that's the beauty of motorsport photography, is that if you handed 20 of us a camera and told us to go photograph a pit stop, we're all 20 of us going to do something very different. with our pit stop. So, using the different settings that we have or the different lenses, different angles. Somebody might shoot it from ground level, which I've done more than a few times. And then some of us might go above and, pick a different frame out of the sequence.
So a couple of things. First of all, did you burst this?
What was the question?
Did you shoot a burst of this?
Yeah, this is a burst. I don't remember how much the D3S did, but it was probably like 10, maybe 11.
Because the fact that is but not the car is not touching the arrow matters greatly. The fact that the car is just entering the frame completely matters greatly. The F-22 is interesting to me. Was that simply because you wanted the low shutter and it was bright outside and you had to darken it, or were you doing F-22 for a structure of the image reason,
No,
or was it purely exposure at 1/15th?
It's purely exposure at 1/15th. I do use ND filters, but I wasn't going up to this location planning to do this shot. And that's kind of how most of my work is. Like, I do have an idea in my head of a picture that I want, but it's not necessarily that well thought out. Like, better bring my ND16 because I want to do an overhead shot. Like, it's not that well thought out. I kind of just went up on the roof and I was like, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on the roof and see if I get anything interesting out of it.
My God.
So it's I probably did a couple different pit stops a couple different ways. I mean, this wouldn't be the only team doing pit stop practice, but if you take the color out of it, so if you had the Mercedes crewed in silver, which is more or less what they're normally wearing, it's a completely different image. Like, you almost want to make it black and white because it wouldn't have any color to it. So just the pit crew being very bright, like orangey red type thing, is I just happened to be taking this particular picture of this particular pit crew. And I was like, well, I'll see what I get at a slow shutter speed and just do the best I can with it and try and do something different as best I can try.
The color is a huge part of this image. You were in spot metering though. So was there a reason? What were you metering on for your spot metering, and what were you focusing on? Or was it just a center focus point and let's hope it lands on something?
I honestly couldn't tell you the reason for the spot metering. That's not entirely true. I do use spot metering because being outside, and especially with cars, and the variation in exposure can change dramatically with a picture, like especially depending on where I am. If you're on pit lane, for example, 1 minute, like I'll be working under a tent backlit where it's just bright, but I want to make sure that I'm getting the right exposure settings on my driver that I'm taking pictures of, him getting in his fire suit and helmet, but behind him is bright sunshine of Florida or whatever it is. So zone doesn't really work that well in my experience, where the camera's like, you idiot, like you're not even in the right ballpark for exposure here. Like, and if you're in any kind of priority setting like shutter or aperture, it's going to screw you. So I am almost always in spot metering because I'd rather see exactly where my focus point that I'm aiming at is, what the exposure is there. But I also do, I have never shot film professionally. The beginning of my career, I never really had that opportunity to shoot film professionally. I have shot film, but I've never shot film professionally. So I've always been able to not rely or lean on the fact that I can actually physically look at the back of the camera to see if I've absolutely massively screwed up the exposure. But I can rely on that because it's a digital camera. Like, if you're not doing it, you should be doing it. The technology is there to assist you and aid you, not make your world harder. So for me, I'm just kind of always looking at the back of my camera, especially if I'm changing locations. Once I'm in a location and I'm not moving, I don't need to look at the back of my camera very often. But when I go to a new location, I want to make sure that the exposure isn't like going to be completely off the charts, or it's something that what I want it to be in my head. And I know that I don't need to edit. Like, there's almost no editing done to this image. Like, if I showed you the raw image, you would say like, yeah, like the raw image is maybe a little bit flatter because there's no contrast bump. But other than that, I haven't changed a single thing about the image. And that's kind of how, going back to the newspaper world, the motorsport photography and photojournalism side, we can't change the, you can't manipulate the picture to the point
Pixels.
where it's no longer that picture.
Right.
So everything I'm doing is more or less being done in camera. I'm not going to add motion blur. I'm not going to move somebody or add the arrow or, change the hue of their, you know, fireproof overalls. Like, it's just not worth it to me, and it just wouldn't be ethical, I guess, in my own head.
You know, oh man, there's just so much I want to go into on this thing. Compositionally, I talked about, I thought that the fact that this thing compositionally was so strong. The poles, watch, for those of you watching on video, right? The poles are almost exactly at a rule of third. Lane lines, almost exactly at a rule of thirds. The pointer, I'm going to call it, which is this angled pole coming in, takes you right to, dead center on almost everything. There's so much going on in this shot, and then the arrow, totally sharp here. It draws your eye from the car towards the jackman. Here's the other thing that was interesting about this shot to me. If you're going to talk about composition rules, not that they're rules, they're, a study of,
Suggestions.
yeah, they're a study of history and what we know the human eye uses to take somebody's brain through an image. You have the rule of odds. You've got 3 lanes. You've got 3 poles. You've got 21 people actually out there because I counted them, right? So as you're leaning over, I'm assuming you were using live view, or were you leaning over and looking through a viewfinder? That, I guess, is question number 1. By the way, I should mention, when you were talking about chimping the back of the screen, I'm getting to a point now where I even, while the camera's up to my face, I hit the play button and review my shots through the electronic viewfinder very quickly, just to not to see if it's a great shot, just am I in the right ballpark on exposure? Anyway, back to what I was saying. How much of this wonderful composition was happening in your head as you were shooting it? How much of it was intentional versus you looked at it when it came up on the computer and went, whoa?
So the second question I'll answer first. So it's not that I had it like planned in my head, but I guess the only way to describe it is that I've always kind of seen my world in those kind of like negative space rule of thirds. Like, I've always been that photographer, and I've worked for magazines. I'm a staff photographer for a magazine here in Charlotte, and I've always been very aware of negative space, and because of negative space, aware of the rule of thirds. So from a very, very early time in my career, like, and most of my study of photography, I have no formal education in it. Most of my study has been just from looking at others' work, like the people that I respect. And the people that I respect have always just been great magazine photographers, because I feel like the magazine photographers they're not Instagram photographers. They're not going to like take an image and crop it to, 500% to make their image out of it. Like, they're going to get it the way they want it in the camera. So studying the people that I really respect in the motorsport world, but not just in the motorsport world, other, niches and genres as well. Rule of thirds and the leading lines and composition is just so important. And it's not that I was intentionally seeking this out, but it's just how I kind of see things is the only way to really describe it. When I walked up to this spot, and again, this is 10 years ago and a very much younger me, I kind of poked my head over the top, and I probably, saw a bunch of pit crew guys getting ready. And I'm like, well, this is going to be a nice shot, but how can I make it different? In that I don't want to just take a 1/2000th or 1/4000th shutter speed at f4,
Right.
because that's easy, and it's not that it's easy, but it's not as interesting. And I wanted to just do something interesting. And at this point in my career, I'm also trying to make a name for myself too. So I'm not just making a name for myself like in this moment, but like overall as a guy that wants to be a professional motorsport photographer. And I wasn't even a professional motorsport photographer at this time. I was still an alarm salesman that had a part-time, job as a photographer. So when I had this opportunity to cover an F1 race or an F1 test, I'm trying to do something different than what everybody else is going to do, because if you do what everybody else is going to do, then you're not going to come home with anything original or interesting. So it was really probably just a bunch of different things going on in my head that I was trying to swing for the fences and hit a home run. And you get everybody, even a blind squirrel can find a nut. And it's just, yeah, it's one of the images that I am proud of. I love to be able to do it again in a modern setting with a modern car and a modern camera. I wasn't using live view. It was take the exposure, making sure that everything is like I want it to be, and then just leaving the rest of it alone. Like I use back button focus, so I know that the focus isn't going to change, and especially at f/22, my depth of field is going to be pretty massive. So I wasn't as worried about the actual focus point, knowing that if I point it at the ground, I know everything like above the ground and below the ground is going to be sharp. But I don't even know that the D3S had a live view option, to be honest. I don't remember.
Well, I was going to ask you about the back button focus because I was curious. In my head, you were probably a back button focus person. You mentioned, the post on this image was not very, very much other than contrast. Is that basically all? I mean, generally with photojournalism, you're limited to, you can correct exposure, dodging and burning and cropping. Is that all you pretty much would have done and what do you use, by the way, like a Lightroom?
Yeah, I use Lightroom, and it's all I've ever done. I mean, I tell people this all the time, and I'm a pretty regular user on TikTok. And the TikTok kids always try and come at me about various things that they think they know more than I do. But they're like, oh, why don't you just Photoshop the blur in and post? It's like, dude, because I don't have time to do that for my clients. Like, it is so exhausting to cover some of these races. Like an F1 race is easy. A 12-hour race or a 24-hour race is not easy. And you're doing, you're awake for 40 hours. And the last thing that I want to be doing is blurring or adding blur in Photoshop to a mediocre image for my client to put on Instagram and spend even an hour or 20 minutes on an image is 20 minutes too much. Like if I can't edit an image in 3 to 5 seconds, like maybe 10 seconds at most, I'm not going to use it, because I'm delivering, if I have 6 clients and each of those 6 clients is getting 50 images a day, you can do the math. If you spend 1 minute on those images, you're going to be spending a fair amount of time at the end of a very long race day just doing post for your clients to not use it or put it on Instagram for 25 people to see. It's really frustrating. So I just try and keep it as simple as possible. Absolutely go with the photojournalism ethics mentality. Like I don't even really do very much dodging and burning. It's not that I don't, but it's not something I spend a lot of time doing. It's mainly a little bit of exposure, a little bit of contrast, send it, crop a little bit and send it.
Well, and I would say to those people that say, why don't you just do it in post, is why wouldn't you just do it in camera if you can? Why set yourself up for layers and processing? I'm assuming you're also a photo mechanic user or not?
Yeah, very much. I've been photo mechanic goes back to the very early days of my photojournalism career at newspapers as an intern. Like everybody at the newspaper used photo mechanic because it's the easiest way to go through high volumes of images. And
Yep.
I've used it every day since, for everything from when I've shot weddings to pictures of my kids to the races that I cover, every week. It's all photo mechanic because it just makes it so easy to look through images quickly and then and then I export it out into Lightroom, do a quick edit, and then send it to where it needs to go.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, so let's switch gears. We're going to do a speed round. For these questions, just answer them with whatever comes to your head first. Number one, your top sports photography, not motorsports, general sports photography tip.
I think I kind of already said it, but put your camera down and use your eyes. Look around. You'll see something that you didn't see looking down the viewfinder.
Top motorsports photography tip.
Don't be afraid to use really slow shutter speeds. Like I'm not talking about an 80th of a second or 60th of a second or 40th of a second. Go crazy. Like anybody can hit a 1/200th pan. Anybody can hit a 1/100th pan. You'll start seeing some really, really interesting stuff down below a 30th, a 20th, a 10th, a quarter second. You'll see some really amazing things.
Biggest photo mistake you made or almost made?
I don't know. The biggest mistake I made is probably early in my career, not taking enough pictures, not trusting my own instincts, not trusting my own talent and intuition of a situation. And something I tell myself now all the time, like if you see something that I'm I feel like something is there, like work it. Don't just give up on it and go on to the next thing. Work it, try and find something out of it, because more often than not, I've found myself going back at the end of the day and looking at a sequence and being like, this was really nice. I should have worked it.
Okay. Favorite composition rule if you have one?
Definitely the rule of thirds.
Favorite source of inspiration?
So I'll give you two. So, and they'll be photographers. So my biggest business and non-motorsport inspiration would be Chris Burkard, a very famous landscape and surfing photographer. But I think his business sense and his ability, his studio stuff, he's created a brand. He's done kids' books, and it's been very impressive and something that I admire and not aspire to, but in some ways, I think that there's more to being a photographer than just taking pictures. I think we can tell stories and share our gift with others in a variety of different ways. And then a photographer that I really respect in the motorsport world would probably be my very good friend, James Moy. He's just so talented, and so talented at so many different things. Like as a motorsport photographer, you have to be good, not just at doing the 20th of a second pans, but also the really boring, product photography and candids and studio stuff. It's not just like, oh, I want to go take pictures of F1 cars for a living. It's like, yeah, don't we all? Because that ain't it. That's not what happens. You don't just get to go take pictures of F1 cars for a living, or any race car for a living. There's a lot more stuff that comes with it. So James is just one of those people that I've always looked up to in his ability to create something out of nothing.
Okay. And for those of you that are used to, I end with a question on, are there any photographers people should follow? That's going to be that question. So I will have links to both of those people in the show notes. Make sure you check them out. Next one, favorite band or performer?
I've always been a Collective Soul fan. I also grew up listening to Jimmy Buffett. My dad was a big Parrot head, so whenever I hear Jimmy Buffett songs, I kind of go back to a fun place in my memory and just summertime vibes. Yeah, Bon Jovi, Collective Soul.
Okay. Favorite movie or TV show?
The HBO miniseries Chernobyl was excellent and scary.
I need to see that still. I have not done that one yet.
It's crazy. It's so good.
Favorite drink?
Gin and tonic.
Okay, I have to go deeper then. A specific gin or any gin?
I'm not a fan of Hendrix. I like Bombay. I'm not too picky, but I'm not a big Hendrix fan.
I like Hendrix. I love Bombay Sapphire, and we've just started for the first time trying Nolet's, and it's fantastic. So if anybody's looking for a good one, Nolet's. Again, Jamey, to say thank you is an understatement. If people want to find you, where can they go?
All of my social medias are all the same. It's all Jamey Price Photo, at Jamey Price Photo. You just have to be able to spell my name. My dad blessed and cursed me with a original name spelling. That's not the normal Jamie. It's Jamey.
Okay. And so it's Jamey Price Photo pretty much anywhere that you go. And then the website is jameypricephoto.com, right?
That's it.
Perfect. I will have those links in the show notes at behindtheshot.tv or in the description on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Jamey, thank you very, very much for doing this, man. I appreciate it. I love your work, dude.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. Great questions.
Thank you very much. And make sure you check out his work. Follow him everywhere. All the links are in the show notes again, behindtheshot.tv. You can follow the podcast and find out everything that's happening on social media as well. It's at Behind the Shot TV. Or if you want to follow me, it's at Steve Brazill everywhere. This lower third doesn't say Mastodon yet. I keep forgetting to do that, but it's basically Twitter, Instagram, or Mastodon. I'm on Facebook too. I don't ever use it. And of course, on YouTube, it's Behind the Shot TV on YouTube, or just Behind the Shot on YouTube. And whatever you do, if you like what we're doing, please hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment if you want to, whatever you want to do. I appreciate all the help and all the support. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you join us next time as we try and get inside the mind of a great photographer by taking a closer look behind the shot.